Names are complicated, aren't they? They're tied to identity and yet given when our desires and proclivities are as yet unknown. I never liked my name as a child. I am, of course, used to it, and I've changed the last name twice. But as a child, I longed for a more interesting name than Lisa Ann Jones. Boring, in my opinion. And I chose names like Dominique or Angelique. I liked the leak names in imagination games whenever I could. When I married the first time, I was a counselor in a halfway house for folks transitioning from psychiatric hospitals back into the community. I took a resident to the hospital one evening, and when a nurse came into the waiting room to ask me to come back, "Mrs. Aquilino?" I did not respond, as I didn't recognize that name as me. Luckily, the nurse was persistent, as I was needed to help calm the frightened resident who wanted to hold my hand. I'm glad they found me, although the action felt much more tied to my identity than did the name. I'm intrigued by the practice in many cultures and in some religions of choosing a new name upon becoming an adult or some other hallmark or transition. Does the practice of naming ourselves help us live our identity more fully? Or do the roles we take on define or completely identify us? Once we find the right name, should we keep it close lest others have power over us? Or does the sharing tighten the bonds we have with others? The poet Rosemary Watola Trummer writes about names and identity in the poem Losing It. It was a tiny percentage I knew, but still, there was some French royalty somewhere in my blood. I would spend hours imagining myself in my proper place, in a long pink dress and thin gold crown, in a castle on a green hillside, doing needlepoint, no doubt, and nibbling bonbons. And so, when I again asked my mother to tell me about that part of our heritage, she told me, "It's so little blood, and you've had so many skin knees. I'm pretty sure you've bled it all out by now." And I was instantly less grandiose. And that was perhaps the first identity that I was aware of losing. But soon after that, I was no longer blonde, and soon after that, I no longer lived in Wisconsin, and soon after that, I was no longer a scout. Everything I thought I knew about myself didn't last. Oh, the litany of losses, these notions of who we are, how they shed, they spill, they slip off. As they are lost, we usually rush to replace them. I became worker, lover, parent, friend. We wear them so close, these identities, that we no longer see them as separate. We think they are who we are. What if we skinned not just our knees, but our thoughts, and let those roles escape? Who would be left to walk through the field this evening, to see the double rainbow stretched across the east? Rosemary Watola Trummer. And then there are the names we give ourselves, or even the way we talk to ourselves. What do we call ourselves when we make a mistake? How do we describe ourselves in our heads? And which of the names that others have applied stick in our own minds? I often respond to compliments or admiration by thinking, I really haven't done enough, become enough, tried hard enough. I could be so much better. Perhaps I and we would do well to ask ourselves which names we want and which we believe. We might ask, what is the name applied for? What does it achieve? Does it belittle or does it uplift? Does it provide comfort when others recognize the name as us? Does it enable them to discover something with us, within us, or about relationship? Does it bring up hate, fear, or anger, or does it bring joy? Does it allow us to see ourselves with wonder and awe, or does it close down wonder and awe, shut it off, box it in, send it away with a word? This song is called Powerful Names, and the thoughts that ended up in this song were spurred by that name incident in the emergency room.
Imagine yourself alone somewhere similar to being on top of a mountain, enshrouded in fog or clouds. All you can see around you is whiteness or gray. No sensation of space or distance. No distinct sounds or motions, nothing touching you, no memory of the past, no people, no memory of people. But suddenly the fog lifts and you find yourself in space, out in space. Distant points of light all around you in every direction like stars. But you're still alone until one of the points of light starts moving toward you. And as it gets closer, you hear a sound that seems to mean hello. So you say hello back. And a connection is made, a conversation begins, and before long, you're joined by another, and then more. You find through conversations with these others, you gain an increasing sense of space and are able to share ideas in that space. And very soon it occurs to you that this community of you and the others gives substance and meaning to your existence. Then at a certain moment, one of the points of light begins to dim or move away and then disappears. And then another one does the same thing. And you begin to fear that you're going to end up back on that mountaintop enshrouded in fog. And you begin to see that while you are originally and basically alone, that you can choose to be connected to others, and that losing those connections is to subtract from the substance and meaning of your existence. The song that we did for the prelude, which is 2-3 songs ago, was called At the End, and it was inspired by my daughter, who before she was born did not exist in my life. And then suddenly she did exist. And then for a long time, she and I were a major part of each other's lives. But time goes on, and at some point I noticed that the connection, that my connection with my daughter was starting to change as she was moving toward adulthood. So that song is me talking to myself, saying, it's not the way you had it planned. You can only stand and watch. Where's the relief seeing her go on to watch her journey lead where you can't go? I'm sure there are parents here who can perhaps relate to that. But the song ends with hope. At the end, we'll be together again. And thankfully, all these years later, that is exactly what has come to be. She, like me, is a parent and a grandparent and has brought people into my life that weren't there before. In the song Chain Gang by Sam Cooke, which will be heard after the silent meditation to follow here, we hear the voice of a person who has been ripped away from his family and confined to perform hard labor day after day. The song was released July 26th. See, I did my research. July 26th, 1960, which, if you count it up, and I did the math, 64 years ago. In 1960, the incarceration rate in the United States was 193 out of every 100,000 people. 193. In last year, when they last tallied it up, it was 573 per 100,000. And yet, do we have a safer environment? So our current version of this song, the one we're going to do, which we'll hear in a moment, after our moment of silence, is slower and more mournful and has fewer added words to emphasize the reality of justice and equality. I have to retune this guitar because, there we go. Yet the song that Sam Cooke wrote, Chain Gang, ends in hope. It says, well, it doesn't end there, right in the middle, it says, I'm going home one of these days, I'm going home. In the minute of silence to follow, I invite you to again imagine yourself on that foggy mountaintop, and then imagine coming down off the mountaintop, out of the fog, and back into the world. Then imagine standing in front of one of the people you are connected to and saying hello to them, and then imagine saying them hello back. Then imagine another person in front of you, and again, say hello.
The overt religion in this next song is merely that somebody says grace before eating it, but the song has felt profound and religious to me since I was a child. The song is on a Peter, Paul, and Mary album, one of many that I would sing along with as I lay on the floor and looked at the album cover. You remember albums? It always brought stillness and softness to me, like the way people lower their voices in a house of worship or in a library. Anyone here ever had dreams of being a very religious person, maybe a nun or a monk? I was kind of an overachiever, so I was going for saint, but that didn't go so well. In fact, I think the Catholic Church is still looking for me for taking communion with my best friend, which I wasn't apparently supposed to do. But in this song, there's a main character who's in chains for some reason, and we don't know why. We know that the character is tired and hungry and has a face full of sorrow and grief. The language sounds like the person is wise or pious or oppressed. We also know that despite the hunger and sorrow, when the narrator of the song supplies a meal, the main character pauses to give thanks before eating. Theology can be a tool to consider our deeper identity or to impose it. I felt the power of identities in this song to do with suffering, charity, and goodness applied to both of the characters, and yet some of these identities can be harmful. It is the poor who often get the short stick when suffering is glorified. Charity can become a crutch that allows us to leave inequitable systems in place. Identities themselves can be chains. I used to believe that only we place chains on ourselves. I now think that is an opinion of privilege, as I am much less likely to be chained by outside forces than a Black or brown or uneducated or poor person. While the mind can still respond to imprisonment with freedom of response, it is not helpful to ignore the power of the chains placed on some folks by society, and indeed, sometimes faced by religion itself. We have often written or chosen songs that we feel have a big message with the intention of spurring thought, inspiration, or positivity. For a period of time, Bill and I laid our good intentions out in a lot of bars in DC and the DC suburbs 4 and 5 nights a week. We had to learn that sometimes, like at festivals and bars, the crowd is maybe not seeking enlightenment so much as the chance to sing along with, "Hey bartender, there's a big bug in my beer." But our identity has always included seeking material that moves people to be optimistic about the future or fix the present. They are hard songs to write about without being trite, and so often my favorites were written by someone else. Bill calls the really great ones pull to the side of the road songs. A song that the first time you hear it, you have to stop what you are doing and really listen. Face down in the moment, the next song shouted for me to pay attention. As I did, I heard the tale of a system gone awry. I thought of the healthcare system in which I work, which is unfortunately worse off now, in my opinion, than during the pandemic. But in so many ways, its faults and inadequacies were highlighted by that incredible event in all of our lives. Being face down in the moment, waiting to let go, seemed to personify the practice of putting out fires rather than fireproofing the house, scrounging to share leftovers or scraps rather than planting a garden. Healthcare is full of well-intentioned people who are manipulated by larger interests in greed. Can anyone think of any other systems or institutions like that? For me, this song is one that takes stock of the reality someone finds themselves in. We certainly face some unpleasant realities, but knowing you need more than putting out fires is a place that gives me hope for the future, and so does this song. I think we're going to have to come out and face all the fear we can't explain. All our lives, we've been face down. Now it's time for us to see. I feel that the work that Paula Cole-Jones shared with us last October about operating as a community of communities rather than as a family systems-based model or a group of individuals offers hope to change the things we may not even recognize yet as part of an old system that needs updating to include everyone and build beloved community. As Reverend Carl often says, and I echo, it is a pleasure to be on this journey with all of you.